My ex is in town and wants to catch up. You don't need the full story." She said it while stirring her coffee, didn't even look up, like she was telling me she'd picked up milk or scheduled an oil change. My name is Ethan. I was 37 years old, and I had been married to Claire for 8 years. We lived in a 3-bedroom house in Omaha, one of those quiet neighborhoods where people wave from their driveways and pretend everything's fine. I worked as a regional sales manager for Thornmere Solutions, a commercial refrigeration company. Not glamorous, but steady. I traveled often, sometimes 2 weeks out of a month, hitting warehouse chains and restaurant suppliers across the Midwest. That morning, I was at the kitchen table reviewing next quarter's projections when Claire dropped that line. I remember setting my pen down slowly, waiting for more. But there was no more. She sipped her coffee, scrolled through her phone, and acted like the conversation was already over. "Which ex?" I asked. "Does it matter?" I let the silence stretch. She finally glanced up, eyebrows raised like I was being dramatic. "Derek," she said. "He's passing through for work. We're just grabbing dinner. It's nothing." Derek. I knew the name. She'd dated him for 3 years before we met. He was the one who'd ended things, not her. She'd never fully explained why, just said it fizzled. But I remembered how her voice changed whenever his name came up. Softer, more careful. "When?" I asked. "Thursday night. You'll be at the Chicago trade show anyway, right?" I nodded slowly. I was supposed to be in Chicago Thursday through Sunday, then flying back Sunday night to leave again with Claire on Monday for our anniversary trip to Cancun. 5 nights at an all-inclusive resort, something we'd planned for months. "Okay," I said. "Sure." She smiled, kissed my forehead, and walked out of the kitchen like nothing had happened. I sat there for a long time after she left. Something cold had settled in my chest, and it wasn't jealousy. It was the way she delivered it. Casual, dismissive. Like I was a formality she'd already handled in her head. Like my opinion, my comfort, my presence in her life, none of it required consideration. That night, I couldn't sleep. I lay in bed listening to her breathe, wondering when she'd started treating me like furniture. When had I become the man who didn't need the full story? I didn't have an answer, but I knew something had shifted. Not in her, in me. By the time the sun came up, I'd already made a decision. I just hadn't told her yet. Claire and I met at a mutual friend's wedding in Kansas City. She was 26, I was 29, and she walked into the reception hall like she owned every room she'd ever entered. Confident, magnetic. The kind of woman who made men trip over themselves just to be noticed. I wasn't smooth. I wasn't the guy who had lines ready. But something about the way she laughed at my awkward joke about the open bar made me think maybe I didn't need to be. We danced badly, talked for 3 hours, and exchanged numbers before the cake was cut. Within a year, we were engaged. Within 2, we were married. The early years were good. We traveled when we could. We renovated the house together, arguing over paint colors and compromising on furniture. She worked as an event coordinator for a large hotel chain, which meant long hours during peak seasons, but we made it work. I believed we were partners. But looking back, the cracks had been there all along. I just didn't want to see them. Claire had a habit of keeping things from me. Small things at first. A coworker she'd had drinks with but never mentioned. An old friend from college who turned out to be an ex-boyfriend. Plans she'd made without telling me until the last minute. Each time I brought it up, she'd wave it off. "You're overreacting." "It's not a big deal. I didn't think you'd care." And I let it go. Every single time, I let it go. Because I loved her. Because I wanted peace. Because part of me believed that maybe I was overreacting. But the pattern never changed. When her phone buzzed late at night, she'd tilt the screen away from me. When I asked about her day, she'd give vague answers and change the subject. When I suggested we spend more time together, she'd remind me how busy she was, how demanding her job had become. Meanwhile, I bent myself around her schedule. I turned down promotions that required more travel so I could be home more. I planned date nights she canceled. I waited up for her when she worked late only to fall asleep on the couch alone. I wasn't perfect. I knew that. But I showed up. I communicated. I tried. And somewhere along the way, I realized she didn't think she had to. The Derek comment wasn't an isolated incident. It was the latest in a long line of moments where Claire made it clear that my feelings were secondary, optional, a box to check, not a person to consider. That Thursday, I was supposed to fly to Chicago, but I started making different plans. I left for Chicago on schedule, or at least that's what Claire believed. I kissed her goodbye Wednesday night, told her I'd call when I landed, and drove to the airport like I always did. But when I got there, I didn't board the flight to O'Hare. Instead, I walked to a different terminal and bought a one-way ticket to Cancun. The anniversary trip. The one we'd planned for months. The one that was supposed to start Monday. I went alone. I didn't tell anyone. I turned off my phone at the gate and didn't turn it back on until I was already at the resort, sitting on a balcony overlooking the Caribbean with a cold drink in my hand. There were no frantic messages yet. Claire thought I was at the trade show, sitting through presentations and shaking hands with refrigeration buyers. She had no reason to suspect otherwise, and I had no intention of correcting her. For the first time in years, I felt something I barely recognized: freedom. Not from Claire exactly, but from the version of myself I'd become with her. The man who swallowed his pride. The man who accepted crumbs and called it love. The man who didn't need the full story. That man stayed in Omaha. This one was drinking tequila on a beach in Mexico, watching the sunset paint the sky orange and wondering why it had taken him so long to get here. Thursday passed, then Friday, then Saturday. I explored the resort. I ate alone at the oceanfront restaurant. I rented a kayak and paddled out until the shore was just a thin line on the horizon. I read a book I'd been meaning to finish for 2 years. On Saturday night, I met a woman named Jasmine at the hotel bar. She was 34, on vacation with friends, and had the kind of easy laugh that made strangers feel like old friends. We talked for hours, about nothing important, about everything. She asked why I was there alone. I needed to remember who I was, I said. She smiled. Did you find him? Getting there. Nothing inappropriate happened that night. We just talked. But for the first time in a long time, I felt seen. Not as a husband, not as a provider, not as the man who didn't need the full story, just as myself. Sunday morning, I finally turned my phone back on. The notifications exploded, missed calls, voicemails, texts, all from Claire. Where are you? The hotel says you never checked in. Ethan, this isn't funny. I called your office. They said you never went to Chicago. Call me now. I stared at the screen for a long moment. Then I smiled, put the phone down, and went to breakfast. She could wait. By Sunday afternoon, Claire's messages had shifted from demanding to desperate. Please just tell me you're okay. I don't understand what's happening. Did I do something wrong? Ethan, you're scaring me. I read them all on the balcony, the sound of waves crashing below. Part of me felt a dull ache seeing her panic. 8 years of marriage didn't disappear overnight. But another part, the part that had been silenced and dismissed for too long, felt something else entirely. Satisfaction. Not cruel satisfaction, not vindictive joy. Just the quiet recognition that for once, she was the one left in the dark. For once, she didn't get to control the narrative. For once, she had to wonder, to wait, to feel what it was like when someone didn't think you needed the full story. I didn't respond. Not yet. Monday came. Our anniversary trip was supposed to start that morning. Claire would have realized by now that I wasn't coming home, that I hadn't just missed a flight or gotten delayed, that something had fundamentally changed. Her calls became less frequent but more frantic when they came. She left a voicemail at noon that I listened to 3 times. Ethan, I talked to your mother. She doesn't know where you are either. I talked to your brother. Nobody knows anything. This isn't like you. Whatever's going on, we can talk about it. Just, please, tell me where you are. Tell me you're safe. Her voice cracked at the end. Real fear. I almost called her back. Almost. But then I remembered Thursday night. The night she was supposed to have dinner with Derek. The night she told me I didn't need the full story. I wondered how that dinner went. I wondered if she'd dressed up, if she'd laughed at his jokes the way she used to laugh at mine, if she'd told him about me at all, or if I was just a footnote in her history, a placeholder she'd mention if it came up but never volunteer. I wondered if she'd thought about me at all. The anger returned, cold and steady. Not explosive, just clear. I spent that afternoon by the pool, reading and watching families splash in the shallow end. A little boy, maybe 5 years old, kept running to show his father seashells he'd found. The father examined each one like it was treasure, praised the boy, and sent him running back for more. I thought about the children Claire and I never had. We'd talked about it early on, but she always had a reason to wait. Her career, the timing, the house. Eventually, I stopped bringing it up. Eventually, I accepted that maybe it wasn't meant to be. Now I wondered if she ever intended to build a life with me at all, or if I was just convenient, stable, predictable, the safe choice after Derek broke her heart. That evening, Jasmine found me at the bar again. She was with her friends this time, 3 women in their 30s laughing and clinking glasses. They invited me to join them. I hesitated, but then I looked at my phone, saw Claire's latest message. I don't know what you want me to say, and slid off my stool. Sure, I said. Why not? For the first time in years, I chose myself. The next 2 days passed like a dream I didn't want to wake from. Jasmine and her friends were from Atlanta, all in town for a bachelorette trip. The bride-to-be was a woman named Kenzie, who spent most of her time on the phone with her fiancé back home, grinning like a teenager. The other 2, Brooke and Fiona, were loud, opinionated, and exactly the kind of company I didn't know I needed. They adopted me into their group without question. We ate seafood on the beach. We did tequila shots at the swim-up bar. We danced at the resorts club until midnight. And when Jasmine grabbed my hand and pulled me onto the floor, I didn't resist. Nothing happened between us. Not physically. But there was something there. A spark. A possibility. A reminder that I wasn't dead inside. That I could still feel something other than obligation and disappointment. Claire's messages kept coming, but they'd shifted again. Less panic, more anger. I can't believe you're doing this. You're being incredibly selfish. We had plans, Ethan. Plans you just threw away. If this is about Derek, you're being ridiculous. That last one made me laugh out loud. If this is about Derek. She still didn't get it. After 8 years, she still didn't understand. It wasn't about Derek. It was about her. About the way she'd made me feel like an afterthought for years. About the way she expected complete trust from me while offering none in return. About the way she'd casually dismissed my feelings as if they were an inconvenience. Derek was just the match. The fire had been building for a long time. I wrote a response, then deleted it. Wrote another, deleted that too. Eventually, I settled on nothing. Let her stew. Let her wonder. Let her feel exactly what I'd felt every time she walked out the door without an explanation. Every time she tilted her phone away from me. Every time she told me I didn't need the full story. Wednesday night, Jasmine and I sat on the beach after the others had gone to bed. The moon was full, the water silver and black, and we talked about our lives with the kind of honesty that only strangers can share. She'd been married once, briefly. Ended badly. She didn't go into details, and I didn't ask. But she understood something about what I was going through without me having to explain it. You're not running away, she said quietly. You're running toward something. There's a difference. I thought about that for a long time. I spent 8 years trying to be enough for someone who never thought I was, I finally said. I don't want to do that anymore. She nodded. Then, without warning, she leaned over and kissed my cheek. Good, she said. You deserve better. I didn't know if that was true, but sitting there on that beach, with the waves whispering and the stars scattered across the sky, I wanted to believe it. For the first time in years, I wanted to believe I was worth more than what I'd settled for. Thursday morning. 1 week since Claire told me she was meeting Derek. 1 week since my life changed direction. I woke up early, watched the sunrise from my balcony, and finally decided to respond, but not with words. I asked Jasmine if she'd take a photo with me. She agreed without asking why. We walked down to the beach, found a spot where the water sparkled behind us, and she wrapped her arms around my shoulders from behind. "Make it look good," I said. She laughed and pressed her lips to my neck just as I snapped the picture. It was perfect, intimate without being explicit, suggestive without being crude, the kind of photo that said everything without spelling anything out. I looked at it for a long time. Then I opened my messages to Claire and hit send. No caption, no explanation, just the photo. I turned off my phone and went to breakfast. When I turned it back on 2 hours later, the screen was chaos. 17 missed calls, 43 text messages, 2 voicemails. Claire's first messages were confusion. "Who is that? Where are you? Ethan, answer me." Then came the rage. "You absolute bastard. After everything I've done for you. You think this is funny? You think this is some kind of revenge? I want a divorce. I want you out of the house. I want nothing to do with you." I read that last one twice. She wanted a divorce. After years of me bending, accommodating, accepting, she was the one demanding out, as if she were the victim, as if I had betrayed her. The irony wasn't lost on me. I typed a response slowly, deliberately. "You wanted to catch up with your ex. I decided to catch up with myself. Turns out we both needed some time apart. I'll have my lawyer contact yours when I get back. Don't worry, you won't need the full story." I hit send and felt something release in my chest. A knot I hadn't known I was carrying. Years of quiet frustration, of swallowed pride, of unanswered questions, all of it loosened and fell away. Jasmine found me on the beach an hour later. She sat down beside me without a word, and we watched the waves together in comfortable silence. "Did it work?" she finally asked. "Yeah," I said. "I think it did." She nodded, then stood and brushed the sand from her legs. "You know," she said, "I'm in Atlanta. If you ever want to visit, I know some good restaurants." I smiled. "I might take you up on that." She walked away, and I stayed on the beach until the sun was high overhead. My phone buzzed again. "Claire, please call me. We need to talk about this like adults." I read the message, considered my options, and then did something I'd never done before. I blocked her number. Whatever came next, the divorce, the lawyers, the division of our life into hers and mine, I'd deal with it when I got home. But right now, in this moment, I was done explaining myself to someone who never listened. I was done being the man who didn't need the full story. Claire found out through mutual friends that I'd been at the Cancun resort the entire week. The resort we'd booked together. The trip she'd assumed I would cancel out of spite. Instead, I'd gone without her, and I'd apparently made new friends. According to my brother, who heard it from his wife, who heard it from Claire's sister, she completely fell apart when she saw the photo. She'd been at home waiting for me to come crawling back with an apology and an explanation. Instead, she got a picture of another woman's lips on my neck and the realization that I wasn't coming back at all. She tried to spin it, of course. Told her family I'd abandoned her. Told her friends I'd lost my mind. But the story fell apart quickly once people started asking questions. Why were you meeting your ex alone? Did Ethan know about it? Did you tell him it was okay for him to be concerned? The answers didn't paint her in a flattering light. I flew home the following Monday. My brother picked me up from the airport and didn't say much, just clapped me on the shoulder and told me I looked better than I had in years. "You did the right thing," he said. I wasn't sure about that, but I knew I'd done something, and for the first time in a long time it was something for myself. Claire moved out before I got back, took her clothes, her personal items, and the coffee maker she'd brought into the marriage, left everything else like a monument to what we'd built and what she'd walked away from. I stood in the empty living room and felt nothing. That, more than anything, told me I'd made the right choice. The divorce took 4 months. Claire pushed for more than she deserved, but when her lawyer saw the timeline, her secret dinner with Derek, my sudden departure, the photo, she backed down. We split things evenly, which was more than fair considering how little she'd contributed in the final years. Derek, for his part, vanished from her life almost immediately. Whatever reunion she'd imagined never materialized. From what I heard, he was engaged to someone else and had only reached out because he was passing through town. Claire had built a fantasy around a man who'd already moved on. I did too, eventually. I transferred to the Denver office 3 months after the divorce was finalized. New city, new start. The mountains were beautiful, and the air felt cleaner somehow, though maybe that was just my imagination. Jasmine and I stayed in touch. She visited once in the spring, and we spent a weekend hiking and eating at her restaurant recommendations. Nothing serious developed, but the friendship was real. She'd helped me remember who I was, and I'd always be grateful for that. Claire reached out once about a year later, a long email apologizing for how things ended, asking if we could talk. I read it, considered responding, and ultimately decided against it. Some doors, once closed, should stay that way. I was sitting on my new apartment balcony when I deleted her message, watching the sunset over the Rockies. The sky was painted in shades of orange and purple, and somewhere below the city was coming alive for the evening. I thought about the man I'd been, the one who swallowed his pride, accepted crumbs, and called it love. That man was gone now, and I didn't miss him at all. If you hate my lifestyle, then go. She said it ice cold, didn't even blink. Just grabbed her jacket and walked out the door to meet Derek, her so-called best friend, for another night of drinks and dancing while I sat alone in our apartment wondering how we got here. My name's Ezra, 28 years old. I worked as a logistics coordinator for Iron Vale Freight in Columbus, Ohio, managing shipment routes and warehouse schedules for 12 hours a day. It wasn't glamorous work, but it paid the bills and gave me a sense of purpose. I came home tired most nights, looking forward to a quiet dinner and some time with my wife, Brooke. What I got instead was an empty apartment and text messages that said she'd be out late. We'd been married for 3 years, dated for 2 before that. In the beginning, Brooke was everything I thought I wanted. Spontaneous, full of energy, always laughing. She made me feel alive in ways I hadn't experienced before. But somewhere along the way, that spontaneity turned into something else. Something that left me standing alone in our kitchen at 11 at night, eating leftovers and staring at my phone. The arguments had become routine. I'd ask where she was going. She'd tell me I was being controlling. I'd suggest we spend a weekend together, just the two of us. She'd say I was trying to isolate her from her friends. Every conversation felt like walking through a minefield, and I was always the one who ended up apologizing just to keep the peace. That night, the night she told me to leave, I'd only asked if she could stay home. Just once. We hadn't had a real conversation in weeks, but she looked at me like I'd asked her to give up breathing. "You knew who I was when you married me," she said, applying lipstick in the hallway mirror. "I'm not changing for anyone." I watched her walk out. The door clicked shut, and the apartment went quiet. I stood there for a long time, longer than I should have, just listening to the silence. It was the kind of quiet that makes you realize how alone you really are. Something shifted in me that night. Not a big dramatic moment, just a small, tired thought that settled into my chest and wouldn't leave. Maybe she was right. Maybe I should go. The realization didn't come with anger or sadness. It came with exhaustion. The kind that seeps into your bones after years of trying to hold something together that the other person keeps tearing apart. I met Brooke at a friend's birthday party back when I was 23. She walked in wearing a red dress, laughing at something someone said, and the whole room seemed to tilt toward her. I wasn't the only one who noticed, but somehow I was the one she talked to all night. She told me she loved my steadiness, Said I was different from the guys she usually dated. I took that as a compliment. Looking back, I think she just needed someone stable to come home to between adventures. Someone who would always be there, no matter how many times she chose something else over him. The first year of marriage was good. We'd go out together on weekends, host dinners for friends, take road trips to nowhere in particular. But gradually, those shared moments became fewer. Brooke started going out without me. First it was once a week, then twice. Then it became the norm, and I was left wondering when exactly I'd become an afterthought in my own marriage. Derek had been in the picture since before we got married. They'd known each other since college, and Brooke insisted their friendship was purely platonic. I wanted to believe her. I really did. But there's only so many times you can watch your wife get dressed up for another man before the doubts start creeping in, settling into the spaces where trust used to live. I brought it up once early in our marriage, asked if maybe they could spend less time together or if I could join them sometimes. Brooke laughed like I'd told a joke. "You'd hate it," she said. "You're not a club person." She wasn't wrong. I'd never been the type to enjoy loud music and crowded bars, but I would have tried. For her, I would have tried anything. My parents had been married for 35 years. My dad always said the secret was showing up even when you didn't feel like it. So that's what I did. I showed up. I cooked dinners she didn't eat. I waited up for her on nights she didn't come home until dawn. I told myself that marriage was work, that every couple went through rough patches. My sister Audrey saw it before I did. She came to visit a few months before everything fell apart and pulled me aside while Brooke was out. "She doesn't treat you right," Audrey said quietly. "You know that, don't you?" I didn't answer. Couldn't answer. Because admitting it out loud would have meant admitting I'd made a mistake, and I wasn't ready for that. The warning signs were everywhere. I just chose not to see them. The night everything changed started like any other. I came home from work around 7, expecting to find Brooke getting ready to go out. Instead, she was already dressed, keys in hand, barely looking at me as I walked through the door. "Derek's picking me up in 10 minutes, she said. "Don't wait up." I set my bag down slowly. "Can we talk first?" She sighed, the kind of sigh that made me feel like a burden. "About what?" "About us? About the fact that we haven't spent a real evening together in over a month." "Here we go again." She rolled her eyes. "I'm not doing this right now, Ezra. I have plans." "You always have plans, that's the problem." She turned to face me then, and the coldness in her expression made me take a step back. "If you hate my lifestyle so much, then go. I'm not going to sit around this apartment every night just because you can't handle me having a life." "Having a life?" I couldn't keep the disbelief out of my voice. "Brooke, I'm your husband. I'm supposed to be part of your life. You are part of my life. You're just not the only part." She grabbed her purse. "I'll be back later, or tomorrow, whatever." She left, just like that. No kiss goodbye, no attempt to understand where I was coming from. Just the sound of the door slamming and her heels clicking down the hallway until the sound faded into nothing. I stood in the living room for a long time after she was gone. The apartment felt different somehow. Smaller, emptier, like all the air had been sucked out of it and left behind only the hollow shell of what we used to have. I walked to our bedroom and opened the closet. Her side was overflowing with dresses and shoes, remnants of nights spent anywhere but here. My side was sparse, practical clothes for practical work. The contrast said everything about who we'd become. That's when the thought crystallized. She told me to go. Maybe it was time I listened. Not out of anger or spite, but out of self-preservation. Out of the simple realization that I deserved better than being someone's backup plan. I pulled out my phone and called Audrey. She answered on the second ring. "Everything okay?" she asked, concern evident in her voice. "No," I said. "But it's going to be." I told her what happened, what Brooke said, what I was thinking about doing. Audrey listened without interrupting, and when I finished, she took a deep breath. "I have a guest room," she said. "It's yours for as long as you need it." "Thanks, Audrey." That's what family is for. Real family. I hung up and looked around the apartment one more time. Then I started packing. The next few hours moved in a blur of quiet determination. Audrey talked me through it on the phone while I started pulling clothes from drawers and folding them into boxes I found in the storage closet. She didn't try to convince me to stay or give it another chance. She just listened, and when I finished explaining what Brooke had said, she let out a long breath. "I've been waiting for you to see it," Audrey said softly. "I'm sorry it took this long." I didn't respond. There wasn't much to say. I'd spent 3 years making excuses for someone who never made any for me. The realization should have hurt more than it did. But mostly I just felt tired. Tired of fighting. Tired of hoping. Tired of being the only one who showed up to a marriage that required 2 people. I worked methodically, room by room. The kitchen held nothing of mine except a coffee mug my father had given me years ago, and a cast-iron skillet that had been my grandmother's. The bathroom was similarly sparse. Brooke had colonized every surface with products and makeup, leaving me a corner of the medicine cabinet for my toothbrush and razor. I gathered my things in minutes. Our bedroom took the longest. Not because I had much there, but because every item carried a memory. The watch she'd given me for our first anniversary. The framed photo from our honeymoon in Savannah. The book I'd been reading for months but never had time to finish because I was always waiting for her to come home. I left the photo, took the watch. Some things were worth keeping even if the person who gave them to you wasn't. By midnight, I had everything packed into my car. It wasn't much. A few boxes of clothes, some books, my laptop, and the small collection of personal items that made up my life outside of this marriage. Looking at it all, stacked in the back of my sedan, I realized how little space I'd actually taken up in our shared existence. 3 years of marriage and everything I owned fit in the trunk of a car. Audrey had offered me her guest room for as long as I needed. She lived about 40 minutes outside the city, in a quiet neighborhood with tree-lined streets and neighbors who actually knew each other's names. It wasn't where I'd imagined ending up at 28, but it was better than staying somewhere I wasn't wanted. Before I left, I walked through the apartment one last time. The closet stood empty on my side, hangers swaying slightly from the air conditioning. The bathroom looked untouched, like I'd never been there at all. The living room held no trace of me except the indentation on my side of the couch, and even that would fade with time. I wondered if she'd even notice I was gone. Then I realized I already knew the answer. The apartment key felt heavy in my hand as I set it on the kitchen counter. I wouldn't be needing it anymore. This place hadn't been home in a long time. Maybe it never was. I took one last look at the life I was leaving behind. The expensive furniture Brooke had insisted on. The abstract art she'd chosen without asking my opinion. The stack of fashion magazines on the coffee table that had replaced the books I used to keep there. None of it was mine. None of it ever had been. The drive to Audrey's felt longer than 40 minutes. Every mile put distance between me and the life I'd tried to build. And with each passing exit, the reality of what I was doing settled deeper into my bones. I wasn't just leaving an apartment. I was leaving a marriage. A future I'd planned. A version of myself that had bent and twisted to fit someone else's expectations until I barely recognized who I'd become. The man driving this car full of boxes wasn't the same man who'd stood at the altar 3 years ago, full of hope and promises. That man had been worn down, piece by piece, until there was almost nothing left. Audrey was waiting on her porch when I pulled into the driveway at 1 in the morning. She didn't say anything as I got out of the car, just walked over and hugged me, and for a moment I let myself feel the weight of everything I'd been carrying. 3 years of disappointment. 3 years of loneliness in a house with another person. 3 years of pretending everything was fine when it clearly wasn't. "You did the right thing," she said against my shoulder. "Doesn't feel like it yet." "It will." We unloaded the car in silence, stacking boxes in her guest room with the kind of efficiency that comes from not wanting to think too hard about what you're doing. When we finished, Audrey made coffee and we sat at her kitchen table while the clock crept toward 2 in the morning. "She'll come back expecting you to be there," Audrey said. "She always does." "I know. And when she finds out you're gone?" I wrapped my hands around the warm mug. I don't know, I don't think she actually believed I'd leave. She spent 3 years testing how much I'd take, and I always took it. Every time she pushed, I pulled back but never walked away. This time is different. What changed? I thought about it. The coldness in Brooke's voice. The way she'd looked at me like I was an inconvenience rather than a partner. The realization that I'd been alone in this marriage for longer than I wanted to admit. The understanding that staying wasn't loyalty anymore. It was just fear. I finally listened to what she was saying. I told Audrey. She told me to go. So I went. My phone sat on the table between us, silent. No texts, no calls. Brooke was still out there somewhere, dancing and drinking and not thinking about me at all. That used to hurt. Now it just felt like confirmation that I'd made the right choice. Around 3 in the morning, Audrey went to bed, leaving me alone with my thoughts. I sat in the quiet of her kitchen, watching the night through the window, and let myself imagine what tomorrow would look like. Then the day after that, and the day after that. For the first time in years, the future didn't feel like something I was dreading. It felt like possibility, like a door opening instead of closing, like finally being able to breathe after holding my breath for so long I'd forgotten what air tasted like. I finished my coffee and set the mug in the sink. The house was quiet around me, peaceful in a way my apartment never was. Even when Brooke was home, there was always tension. Always the anticipation of the next argument, the next disappointment. Here, there was just silence. And it was beautiful. Before I left the apartment, I'd written a note. It took me 3 tries to get it right. The first version was too long, full of explanations and justifications that Brooke wouldn't read anyway. The second was too angry, filled with accusations that would only give her ammunition to play the victim like she always did. The third version was simple, direct, exactly what I needed to say and nothing more. Enjoy your shallow life because I'm done. I'd left it on the kitchen counter, propped against the coffee maker where she'd see it when she came home looking for water to cure her hangover. Part of me wondered if I was being cruel. The rest of me knew that cruelty would have been staying and letting both of us rot in a marriage that had died long before either of us admitted it. At 4 in the morning, my phone finally lit up. Brooke's name flashed across the screen, followed by a series of texts that arrived in rapid succession. Where are you? Ezra, this isn't funny. Why is your stuff gone? Call me right now. I read each message without responding. There was nothing to say that the note hadn't already covered. She'd told me to leave. I left. The logic was simple, even if the execution had taken 3 years too long. My phone rang. I let it go to voicemail. It rang again and again. By the 5th call, I turned it off and set it face down on Audrey's kitchen table. The silence that followed was different from the silence in our apartment. This quiet felt peaceful, earned. Like the calm after a storm, you didn't realize you'd been weathering for years. I thought about all the nights I'd waited up for her, all the dinners that went cold while I sat alone at the table, all the conversations that turned into arguments because I dared to want more than crumbs of her attention. I thought about the way she'd laugh with Derek, loud and genuine, in ways she never laughed with me anymore. I thought about the promises we'd made at our wedding and how she'd broken every single one while I kept trying to hold us together. She'd built a life that had no room for me in it. The least I could do was stop forcing myself into spaces where I wasn't welcome. Sometime around dawn, I finally fell asleep on Audrey's couch. My dreams were empty and restful, free from the anxiety that had plagued me for months. When I woke up a few hours later, the sun was streaming through the windows and my sister was making breakfast. She called me, Audrey said, not looking up from the stove. 7 times between 4 and 6 in the morning. What did you tell her? Nothing, I didn't answer. She flipped a pancake with practiced ease. She left voicemails, though. First one was angry. Second one was crying. Third one was threatening. By the 7th, she was begging. I sat at the table and accepted the plate Audrey handed me. I don't want to hear them. Good. You shouldn't. We ate in comfortable silence. The pancakes were perfect. The coffee was strong. The morning light made everything feel clean and new. Outside the window, birds were singing in the trees, and somewhere down the street, a lawnmower hummed to life. This was peace. This was what life was supposed to feel like. I smiled. The first real smile I'd felt in longer than I could remember. The full weight of what happened hit Brooke in stages. First came the disbelief, then the anger, then finally the panic. She showed up at Audrey's house 3 days after I left, mascara smudged and voice hoarse from what I assumed were several sleepless nights. I watched from the window as she pounded on the front door, demanding to talk to me, demanding explanations, demanding I come home and stop being so dramatic. Audrey answered. I stayed inside. He doesn't want to see you, my sister said calmly. This is ridiculous. We had a fight, couples fight. He can't just leave like this. He didn't just leave, Brooke. You told him to go. He went. I didn't mean it like that. Then maybe you should have thought about that before you said it. I listened to Brooke's voice crack as she tried different approaches. Anger didn't work. Bargaining failed. Tears fell on deaf ears. None of it moved Audrey. My sister stood firm, a barrier between me and the chaos I'd finally escaped. Brooke's face twisted with frustration, then desperation, then something close to fear. She looked past Audrey, trying to catch my eye through the window. I stepped back into the shadows. Ezra, please, she shouted. You're overreacting. Come out and talk to me. I didn't move, didn't speak, just watched as she slowly realized that this wasn't a negotiation. Eventually, Brooke left. I watched her car pull away, tires squealing slightly as she accelerated down the street. She looked smaller somehow, less certain, like a person who'd just realized the ground they'd been standing on wasn't as solid as they thought. The silence after she left was sweet. Brooke's carefully constructed social life crumbled faster than I expected. Without a husband to pay half the rent, she couldn't afford the apartment. Without me to serve as her designated driver and safety net, her late nights caught up with her. She lost her job at the marketing firm after showing up hungover one too many times. Derek, her beloved best friend, distanced himself when she started leaning on him for the stability she used to get from me. Turns out he only wanted the fun version of Brooke, not the needy one. Last I heard from mutual friends, she'd moved back in with her parents in Kentucky. The party girl who'd told me to leave if I didn't like her lifestyle was living in her childhood bedroom at 29, facing the consequences of choices she never thought would catch up with her. I felt no satisfaction in her downfall, no vindication, just a quiet sense of closure like finishing a book you probably should have put down chapters ago. The months after the divorce were slow but steady. I found a small apartment closer to work, furnished it with things I actually liked, and started rebuilding a life that was entirely my own. I reconnected with friends I'd neglected during the marriage. I started running in the mornings, something Brooke had always mocked as boring. I cooked dinners that I actually ate, at a table I actually sat at, in silence that I actually enjoyed. One evening, about 8 months after I'd walked out, I sat on my balcony watching the sun set over Columbus. The sky burned orange and pink above the city skyline. I was finally free. Not just from Brooke, but from the version of myself who thought love meant losing yourself completely. Sometimes the bravest thing you can do is take someone at their word.